Scotland in the late 13th century was a land on the edge, its fate hanging in the balance. The wild windswept highlands and misty glens concealed a nation simmering with uncertainty and fear. For generations, the Scottish people had looked to their monarch for stability, but now, that certainty was about to vanish. In 1286, tragedy struck when King Alexander III died suddenly, leaving the throne without a strong adult heir. The only legitimate successor was his granddaughter Margaret, known as the Maid of Norway, a mere child living far from Scotland's shores in the distant Norwegian court. The hopes of an entire kingdom rested on her young shoulders, but fate was cruel. As Margaret journeyed across the treacherous North Sea to claim her crown, she fell ill and died before ever setting foot on Scottish soil. With her passing, the fragile thread holding the kingdom together snapped, and Scotland was plunged into a period of deep uncertainty and chaos. With no clear successor, the throne became the prize in a dangerous game. 13 powerful nobles, each with their own claim, began to vie for the crown. Old rivalries flared, and the threat of civil war loomed over the land, as families and clans prepared to fight for supremacy. Desperate to avoid bloodshed and unable to agree among themselves, the Scottish nobles turned to an outside power for help. They appealed to King Edward II of England, hoping he would act as a neutral judge and bring order to the chaos. But Edward saw an opportunity to expand his own power. He agreed to arbitrate, but only if the Scots first recognized him as their overlord. Reluctantly, the Scottish nobles consented, and in 1292, Edward chose John Balliol as king, a decision that would have dire consequences for Scotland's independence. Balliol's reign was overshadowed by English interference. Edward treated him not as a sovereign but as a puppet, humiliating him at every turn and undermining his authority. The proud Scottish nobility chafed under this foreign domination, their resentment growing with each passing year. Tensions reached a breaking point when Edward demanded Scottish troops for his war against France. The Scots, unwilling to be used as pawns in England's conflicts, refused. Instead, they forged a bold alliance with France, defying Edward's authority and setting the stage for open conflict. Enraged by this act of defiance, Edward launched a brutal invasion in 1296. His army stormed the border town of Berwick, massacring its inhabitants, and crushed the Scottish forces at the Battle of Dunbar. The kingdom was left reeling from the devastation. Edward's conquest was swift and merciless. He deposed King Balliol, seized the Sacred Stone of Destiny, a symbol of Scottish kingship, and declared Scotland a conquered province of England. The ancient nation's independence was shattered, its people left in shock and despair. Under English occupation, Scotland's future seemed bleak. Castles were garrisoned by foreign soldiers, villages lay in ruins, and the proud spirit of the people was put to the ultimate test. The very identity of the nation was at stake. Yet even in these darkest days, the Scottish people refused to surrender their hope. In secret gatherings and whispered conversations, talk of resistance began to spread. The seeds of rebellion were quietly taking root, nurtured by the memory of freedom and the longing for justice. Among the oppressed, a new generation of leaders was emerging. One of them, a young man named William Wallace, would soon rise to embody the nation's defiance. His courage and determination would inspire others to take up arms to fight for Scotland's liberty. Out of Scotland's darkest hour, a spark of hope was kindled. The struggle for freedom was about to begin. From the ashes of defeat, the legend of Scotland's greatest hero would be born. In the late 13th century, Scotland was a land shrouded in uncertainty and despair. With the country under the iron grip of English rule, hope for freedom seemed all but extinguished. Yet from the shadows of oppression, a new leader would rise. William Wallace, a name that would echo through the ages. Wallace, though born a minor noble, was driven by a fierce sense of justice and a burning desire for liberty. His journey into legend began in 1297 when he struck back against tyranny by killing the English sheriff of Lanark. This single act of defiance transformed him from an unknown rebel into a symbol of hope for all Scots. News of Wallace's rebellion spread like wildfire, igniting the hearts of ordinary men and women across the land. Farmers, craftsmen, and peasants, people who had long suffered under foreign rule, now found the courage to take up arms. At the same time, in the north, Andrew de Moray led his own uprising, showing that the spirit of resistance was alive in every corner of Scotland. United not by loyalty to a king, but by a shared vision of freedom, Wallace and Moray forged an alliance that would rally the nation. Their cause was not for personal glory, but for the soul of Scotland itself, a fight for the right to determine their own destiny. The movement reached its first great test at the Battle of Stirling Bridge. Against overwhelming odds, Wallace and Moray's forces outmaneuvered a much larger and better equipped English army. Their victory was not just a military triumph, but a powerful statement that Scotland would not bow easily. The cost was high. Moray was mortally wounded in the fighting, leaving Wallace to carry the torch of leadership alone. Yet the victory at Stirling Bridge sent shockwaves through both Scotland and England, proving that the Scots could stand against even the mightiest foe. Wallace's triumph electrified the nation. Across Scotland, people celebrated, their spirits lifted by the hope of freedom. In England, King Edward I was shaken, realizing that his conquest would not go unchallenged. For the first time in years, the Scots dared to believe that victory was possible. Around campfires and in villages, stories of Wallace's courage inspired new recruits to join the cause. Under Wallace's leadership, what began as a desperate resistance transformed into a true national movement. He united clans and commoners alike, forging a sense of purpose that transcended old rivalries. The fight for Scotland's soul had truly begun. Every battle, every sacrifice, brought them closer to the dream of independence. The English would soon return, determined to crush the rebellion, but so too would the courage and determination of the Scottish people, now united as never before. The legend of William Wallace was only beginning to unfold, a story of bravery, sacrifice, and the unbreakable spirit of a nation fighting for its freedom. At Falkirk, William Wallace's army was not a force of seasoned warriors, but a true people's army, around 6,000 infantry, most of them ordinary Scots. These men, drawn from villages and towns across the land, were mostly spearmen, trained to fight in the formidable schiltron formation. The schiltron was a defensive circle bristling with long pikes designed to repel charging cavalry and hold the line against overwhelming odds. It was a symbol of Scottish ingenuity and unity, a wall of wood and steel forged by necessity. These were not professional soldiers, but farmers, craftsmen, and townsfolk, men who had left their fields and workshops to defend their homeland. Despite their lack of formal training, their determination was fierce. Each man fought not just for glory but for his family, his village, and the freedom of Scotland itself. Wallace's forces also included a handful of archers, skilled with the bow but far fewer in number than their English counterparts. A small cavalry contingent, lightly armored and often unreliable, rounded out his ranks. These horsemen lacked the discipline and resources of the English knights, but their courage could not be doubted. Yet within Wallace's camp, unity was fragile. Many Scottish nobles resented Wallace's rise from commoner to guardian of Scotland. Their loyalty was uncertain, and some even questioned his leadership, creating tension and division at a critical moment. Opposing them was the might of Edward III's English army, a massive force of 15,000 men. Among them were 2,000 heavily armored knights, the elite of England's military, and thousands of deadly longbowmen, whose reputation for devastation on the battlefield was already legendary. The English longbow, with its unmatched range and power, could rain death from afar, piercing armor and breaking formations. It was a weapon that would prove decisive in the coming clash, striking fear into the hearts of those who faced it. Edward's army was a well-oiled machine of war, cavalry, infantry, and archers working in deadly harmony. Their discipline, training, and sheer numbers made them a formidable opponent, capable of overwhelming even the bravest defenders. Still, the Scots stood firm. Outnumbered and outmatched, their resolve was unbroken. They knew the odds, but their courage and unity gave them hope in the face of overwhelming adversity. As dawn broke over the fields of Falkirk, the fate of a nation hung in the balance. The open landscape would soon bear witness to a clash that would echo through history. For William Wallace, this was the ultimate test of leadership. He would need every ounce of courage, strategy, and determination to inspire his men and hold the line. The stage was set for a battle that would not only decide the fate of Scotland, but shape the destiny of a people for generations to come. After Stirling Bridge, Wallace was named Guardian of Scotland and led daring raids into England. Edward I, determined to crush the rebellion, assembled a vast army and marched north in 1298. Wallace, outnumbered, adopted scorched earth tactics, burning crops, denying the English supplies. Edward's army starved and morale plummeted, nearly forcing a retreat. But two Scottish earls betrayed Wallace's position at Falkirk to Edward. Seizing the chance, Edward marched through the night, despite injury, to confront the Scots. At dawn, the English found Wallace's army arrayed for battle. Wallace's strategy of avoidance had failed. He was forced to fight on ground favoring the English. The decisive confrontation was inevitable. The Scots braced for the storm. Wallace's gamble had led them to the brink. The fate of Scotland hung in the balance. As battle began, Wallace formed his men into 4 massive schiltrons, circles of spears, nearly impenetrable to cavalry. Archers filled the gaps, while the unreliable Scottish cavalry waited in reserve. Wallace's words rallied his men. "I have brought you to the ring. Now hop if you can." English knights charged, but the schiltrons held, repelling wave after wave. The discipline and courage of the Scots stunned the English. Even the famed cavalry of Edward I could not break the wall of pikes. For a moment, it seemed the Scots might repeat their triumph at Stirling. The English cavalry was fought to a standstill. The battle teetered on a knife's edge. The schiltrons stood firm, hope flickering in Scottish hearts. But the English had one weapon left in reserve. The deadliest phase of the battle was about to begin. The Scottish cavalry fled, abandoning the field and shattering morale. With the flanks exposed, Edward unleashed his longbowmen. Thousands of arrows rained down on the packed schiltrons, turning the battlefield into a slaughterhouse. The Scots, unable to retaliate, endured a relentless storm of death. The schiltrons, so strong against cavalry, became death traps under the arrow barrage. Gaps opened as men fell, discipline wavered, and panic spread. The English archers decimated the Scottish ranks, their short bows useless in reply. Wallace watched helplessly as his army was destroyed from afar. The hedgehog of spears was stripped bare, one arrow at a time. The English had found the key to breaking Scottish resistance. The battle's outcome was now inevitable. The longbow had changed the face of war. Falkirk would be remembered for its carnage. The arrow storm broke the schiltrons. Chaos and slaughter followed. Edward's knights charged again, this time smashing through the shattered Scottish lines. The battle devolved into a massacre. Scots cut down as they tried to flee. Pockets of resistance fought desperately, but were overwhelmed. Wallace led a rearguard action, allowing some to escape into the woods. The field was littered with the dead. The Scottish army was destroyed. Edward had his revenge, believing he had crushed Scottish resistance. The dream of freedom seemed lost. Falkirk was a disaster for Scotland, but the spirit of defiance would not die. Wallace escaped Falkirk, but his reputation was shattered. The nobles blamed him and forced his resignation as guardian. Leadership passed to Robert the Bruce and John Comyn, whose rivalry weakened the cause. Wallace became a fugitive, seeking support abroad while Edward pressed his advantage. Yet Edward's victory was incomplete, his army exhausted, Scotland unconquered. The Scots learned bitter lessons. Open battle was folly, the longbow deadly. Guerrilla tactics replaced pitched battles. The war dragged on, Scotland battered but unbroken. Wallace's gamble had failed, but the fight for freedom continued. The cause endured, waiting for a new champion. Scotland's struggle was far from over. Wallace's story did not end at Falkirk. Hunted for years, he was betrayed and captured in 1305. Tried for treason, he declared he owed no loyalty to Edward. His allegiance was to Scotland. Wallace was brutally executed, his body displayed as a warning. Instead, his martyrdom inspired the Scots, fueling their resistance. Wallace became a symbol of sacrifice and patriotism, his legend growing after death. Robert the Bruce, learning from Wallace, seized the crown and led Scotland to victory at Bannockburn in 1314. Wallace's legacy was the fire of freedom that could not be extinguished. He showed Scotland it could fight back, even against impossible odds. The foundations of independence were laid by the guardian who refused to kneel. Wallace's spirit would inspire a nation for centuries.